Welcome to Leadership and Culture in Healthcare. I'm Matthew Wynn, podcast host, and we are into the summary episode of Series 4. Series 4, I've had the delight of talking to chief execs from councils of all sorts, north and south, different types of councils, about their experience of leading their own functions, but also leading with the NHS. And I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Lloyd, who is going to help me pull the themes together. Mark, welcome. Why don't you, rather than me, introduce yourself, tell people why Mark Lloyd might have some knowledge and insight into this world as well.
Matthew, thanks ever so much for inviting me along to this summary podcast. I've been privileged to have 10 years as the chief executive of two significant councils, one in the northeast of England and the second in the east of England, before spending 8 years representing all councils as the chief executive of the Local Government Association, which gave me a chance to help councils with their improvement and get up close and personal with the relationship with chief executives and all of their partner organisations. And I hope I can bring that to bear as we reflect on the conversations you had.
Yeah, brilliant. So a lot of pedigree there. And let's dive into these episodes that we've had. So we've had unitary councils, district councils, county councils, and one of my reflections is they've all had a similar feel about them, which is, I think, pretty impressive public servant leaders balancing a whole bunch of both priorities, responsibilities, and challenge, all framed within a local political environment. And you've done this job. Just kind of give a view on what you heard in your experience about perhaps how tough that is.
Well, let me reflect on the role and then the toughness. All of your guests in Series 4 underlined the local in local governments. And I think they pulled out clearly their accountability to their councillors that they work for and to their community, which brings a different set of objectives and challenges in how they go about their role, and also can provide a great touch point with partners, but can also bring great tensions. And chief executives in local authorities, to deal with your toughness question, need to manage the relationships with their partners, including the wonderful people in the NHS and all of its bodies and all of the things they're trying to achieve against the national mandate, with their local community and the things that matter in every street, in every community, in every village and town, in the place that they represent. And of course, the politicians that they work with and for have a whole set of things they've promised the electorate that they want to deliver. And the job of the chief executive is to try and make all of those things work together. It's a brilliantly rewarding job, Matthew. It is the best job in the world, I think. I am biased, but I think that. But it does bring with it all of those tensions and responsibilities.
And I think let's just dig into that a bit more, because I mean, I work a lot in my day job with local authorities of all types and massive relationships. And I think even I probably lost sight sometimes of that element of accountability. So the difference between in the UK system is that the NHS, I as a chief exec of an NHS organisation, accountable to Parliament. I can be called in. I have a direct line into government via kind of intermediate organisations sometimes, but that is my accountability. In a local authority chief exec, you are accountable to your elected members. And I just kind of was really interested in, therefore, that thing that you just said about localism, which could be hyper local, versus statutory responsibilities that a council does. And I think I probably see that play out more than I think in, therefore, elected members wanting to do things and the officers trying to get their things that actually they know by law they have to do right. Would that be a fair reflection?
Yes, I think it is, Matthew. Right. So council chief executives work for all of their elected councillors every single day of the year. And of course, there will be within those councillors political groups, and there might be a political group that's in a majority, and you will spend more time working with your majority politicians. But as a council chief executive, every single day you work for every councillor, and you need to help and support the councillors that are not in a majority group or are not in a ruling group or coalition to achieve the things that they want to do in their community. I started my career in central government. I've got lots of very close friends at various grades throughout the civil service, right up to permanent secretary level. And I understand so well that they work for the government of the day. And that's it. They have no contact with the opposition parties. In local government, it's not like that. We work for the representatives of each and every community and try to help them meet their needs, which brings a whole bunch of tensions that chief executives, I think, very elegantly try to meld together into a sensible and coherent policy locally. So I would encourage all of our health colleagues never to forget that accountability that they've got in local government. They work for the council and the councillors, trying to meld together all of those local ambitions with what partners are trying to do on their central mandates.
And I was, because I've never really known this figure, but I was quite taken back by this figure of 1,300 statutory responsibilities if you're an upper tier council. So for those that are listening, the upper tier council would be the full kind of social care responsibilities. That's probably for a unitary organisation that holds all local authority responsibilities together. So that's just, I'm actually not quite sure I can really understand 1,300 statutory responsibilities at the same time as 70% of the money goes into children's and adult social care.
So it's I listen carefully to colleagues underline that point. Well, during my decade running councils, and even with my 8 years representing councils, I didn't spend an awful lot of time worrying about the 1,300 statutory responsibilities. I spent more of my time worrying about how that translates into around, in many councils, 800 different services. And those services range from the things that are known so well around social care, schools, housing, planning, waste collection. But then, of course, you've got a whole bunch that are less well known, like licensing, business support, registrar services, pest control, and on the list goes. And the challenge, of course, for a council is how do you deliver across the 800 services when you've got some demand-led, very expensive services supporting individuals during moments of crisis in their life, our health and social care activities, which are uncapped and do come, as you say, with legal responsibilities that are placed on councils to meet the needs of the individuals. And that's a word council chief execs very seldom use, but that's the rationing process that they're going through. And when you've got councillors that are really concerned about the things in every neighbourhood and every street, the parks, the state of the public spaces, the play equipment, all the things that all the public want all of the time, and yet you're spending a very significant proportion of your resources necessarily servicing a small proportion of the community, that's an inbuilt tension for councils. And one of the things that we're going to need to tease through in this radical reform of public services that the government's triggered.
I think that really came home to me again this week. I was up in Kings Lynn, up in West Norfolk, and they are embarking on wanting to become a marmot community. And so that's a community, for those who listen and don't know, who want to really tackle the inequalities, the equity of life, looking at the disparity between local populations and life chances. And I was listening to Professor Marmot talking and listening to some of the data, and it made me sit there and think, wow, that surely is the kind of primary purpose of a local council. That is about the street scene. That is about the standards of food. That's about the standards of housing in the area. It's about insulation. It's about opportunity. It's about getting right the education opportunities and safety in an area. And yet we all probably think that probably is really important, but it kind of worries me. And I sat there thinking, not actually worried, but I sat there thinking this could really be a periphery still if we don't get this element right, a balance of what local councils are able to deliver.
Yeah, so it's a great question again, Matthew. So So I entered the workplace in the 1980s, and I ended up in a relatively senior role in a council quite young. And I was able to sit at the feet of some real experts, including the then boss of the Strategic Health Authority in the northeast of England, a name that will be known to some listeners, Ken Jarrold. And I sat with Ken one day, and I'd got responsibility for economic developments in the council area I was working. And I said, Ken, I know you've got massive responsibilities. How can I help you? What can I do in my role in this council to help you to do your job more effectively? And Ken, with all of his great responsibilities across the whole of the Northeast, said, Mark, get people jobs. That's the biggest thing you can do to help me, get people jobs. Right. And I thought that was a bit blunt, right? And we all can refine Ken's message, but at its core is recognizing that we've got all of these interdependencies, and councils can play a massive role, as all of your four contributors said in series 4, Matthew, a massive role in improving people's health and well-being, which isn't necessarily of a clinical nature. Are they worrying about debt? Are they worrying about housing? Are they worrying about their job? Are they worrying about their kids? And we have to have all of those services working well to give people healthy lives.
And I'm sure you'll have a view on this, but therefore, given the new government, one of their number one issues. So, can you have more than one number one? Well, let's go for number one anyway. It's growth. It's growth, whether it's in jobs, whether it's in the economy, then drives the investment cycle, improvement of public service, etc., which we all kind of understand. But I suppose I'm not clear that I really, or have confidence, perhaps, Mark, and you'll have insights about whether that bit of local government responsibility and functioning sits at the heart of that. And if the growth agenda doesn't support councils to do that core work, we'll be missing a trick, to say the least, wouldn't we?
So do councils still care about driving their economy, driving growth? Oh, yes. It's a very loud and resounding yes from councils. Do they have all of the tools that they need to do it? You would hear an equally resounding no from council colleagues. And they'd be saying that they'd love to have more influence and control over skills. They'd like to make sure that you've got the right infrastructure in place to allow more economic growth. They'd like to have a greater influence over regulation so that they can make their businesses thrive and succeed. A list could go on, Matthew. So we've potentially got an answer with the government's push towards more devolution, and the government's idea that you have democratically elected mayors, elected at large, which is perhaps a point that's worth unpacking a bit more in a while, who will exert influence over a whole range of given responsibilities, but also trying to influence things that are not necessarily in their remit to make an area work better. And if we can get to a point where we can ensure that there are local interventions that support local growth, we're going to be far more effective than a one-size-fits-all solution coming out of Whitehall. Far more effective. And that's where councils can really play to their strengths.
And we'll move into devolution in a second, because I think it's important to kind of then think through some of those themes and what leadership is needed in that space. But just to drill finally into this 800 service areas, 1,300 statutory responsibilities, I wondered whether the conversations I had were light, quite rightly, because these are public servants serving their political local elements. But I wonder whether they really in secret, though, as chief execs, think, actually, I need better tools, more flexibility about how I could provide those 800 services so it's not so costly. Otherwise, I'll never do those other bits. Do you think that's an absolute requirement from local authority chief execs and leaders? And do you think there's a reality that they're going to be given some of that wriggle room to do it? Because I get the sense they're quite constrained, and it takes quite a lot of guts to then loosen the parameters around some things that could be highly contentious.
So there's a debate running, isn't there, across all public services, including the world of health, about can we do more with less, or are we end up going to do less with less? But there's a theme I think that we need to unpack more, Matthew, about how we drive proper productivity in our public services. So how can we get better outcomes for individuals, for communities at less cost? Some of the examples, I do a little bit of work with a really super management consultancy called Empower, And they've got this really strong focus on better outcomes can cost less. And it's thinking about, say, children that are in the care system. Staying in the care system is a really bad outcome for children. If you look at them, what happens to them through their lives, the more that we can bring them back to their community, we can reunite them with their families, we can support them in their family setting, the better their outcomes will be. And this isn't the bit we highlight in saying that, it costs much less, Matthew. So better outcomes at less cost. And I think we need to have some proper, mature conversations across public services about how we pursue that particular agenda so that we can maximize the impact of our resources, so that we can do all of the things that we want to do statutorily, but also all of the things that our elected politicians are desperate to do to make their communities more livable. Right? So there is a win-win in this, and the transformation that we're going through, which I'm sure you'll want to come back to, can open up some of the conversations about the art of the possible. Where do we have the overlap? I think it was Rachel Shimin in her interview with you said, let's not focus on, I can't remember what number she said, maybe 30, but let's focus on three things. What are the three things that absolutely unite us? And let's drive a conversation around them.
Just finally on this then, though, do you sense an appetite? It's not that long ago since you were in that heavy kind of arm wrestling with as in the local government association, talking to government, saying, look, this is the nature of change we need, and you will no doubt know some of the things that are going on now. Do you get a sense there is the appetite then essentially to say, yeah, we'll relax these things, we will give you more flexibility?
So for all of the time I've been in leadership roles in public services, I think this is absolutely true when I say this, we've been talking about notions of rewiring public services. I think that was the actual phrase we used when this notion was first put out there. How can we take everything that we do across the public service and think about how we reprogram them so they have more impact? And about every 3 or 4 years, Matthew, it comes back to the fore. And I think with the election of the new government, we're at a point again where they're keen to think about how do we do that rewiring? How do we do that empowering and enabling of anchor institutions like councils, like health services, to really make a difference for their communities? But we need to take the notion from the flash to the bang. And I'm not sure that we're there yet in that transition. And of course, now we've got so much turmoil in our organizations, there's a risk that our focus becomes institutional rather than outcomes for people. And we must cut through that.
Yeah. And let's move into that, because I recorded these episodes when all of these chief execs knew some would be affected more than others, that actually the government had asked for the tiers, i.e. districts and councils especially, to be abolished, to move into one structure of local government delivery, but with, as you said, a mayor over the top in areas that haven't got it. We're also recording this conversation a day after the government announced that they are abolishing the national body, overseeing body, arm's length to the Department of Health and Social Care called NHS England. So two massive changes happening at the same time. So let's start with local government reorganisation. As I would have expected, all four of them were kind of fairly upbeat. This is about opportunity. This is about, getting the best for the local resident. Just thinking about the leadership ask on those individuals, they're going to have quite a hefty balance, aren't they? Because they're going to have to be, they will be, of course, thinking about themselves probably. They'll be thinking about their teams. There'll be probably people that have spent lots of time moulding an organisation and putting their life and soul into it. So that's on a personal level really hard. Same time, they've got a mandate to change. They've got a public service ethos to say we've got to do things differently. And they've got to then support their politicians to say we've got to make this as easy and as well as possible to get better outcomes at the end. I think I've just kind of described an even bigger task for local authority chief execs than they've even got now.
So your interviewees, Rachel Shimin's been through that process in Buckinghamshire. Stephen Moyer talked, I think, brilliantly about how he's setting himself up to make sure he leaves a great legacy in Cambridgeshire as they move to a new arrangement. I was just applauding the way Stephen presented that issue. When I was in Durham, had the responsibility for leading the conversation about a move from two-tier local government to a single tier. So I've been through this journey myself. I'm sure Stephen and Rachel did it more elegantly than me, but I've been on the journey too. So there's a core issue about, is this the right thing to do? And we do need to make sure we drive best value. We do need to be able to overcome the Treasury's accusations that we've got waste and duplication by having different tiers of government, accept all of that. The debate in local government land will come down to, is big efficient, is smaller more local? And what's the sweet spot between those two things? And I'm not telling you the answer, Matthew, because the answer will differ in every part of the country depending on the community's needs. There will be different answers. We also need to think about how we address the issue that you've already signaled about how do we drive the economy. So some of our key cities, our key economic strength areas, how do we support them to thrive for the benefit of the nation and indeed the world's economy? Yeah. I know you're over in east of England near Cambridge. That's a great example. What's the right answer for Cambridge, for example? So can chief executives rise to this challenge of not worrying about themselves whilst trying to make sure there's the right public service solution for their area? I can give you an overwhelming yes to that. I spent yesterday evening, the day of the NHSE announcement, with 10 chief executives and council leaders worrying about what the right answer is for their area. And it was not a self-interest. It wasn't about politicians' positioning. It wasn't about chief executives' next role. It was about what's going to work best for this area, what will allow the best interrelationship with health, what will drive the economy most effectively, how can we integrate with the higher education institutions, what will allow us to have a bigger voice nationally, internationally. All of the right questions, Matthew, was driving the conversation. So I sit here in March 25, confident that local government will promote the right solutions. We need government then to get behind them in those answers. And they'll need to work so closely with our colleagues in health to effect the change at the same time that health's going through a transition.
Yeah. And when you say we need government to get behind, is that a kind of view that, okay, you've announced it, but actually there then needs to be pace for implementation and change and a methodology to make it good in terms of what you're saying? Because I suppose I'm also conscious of, it won't be long before there'll be year one tick done for this government. I would have thought they would want politically to say we've made change and we can prove that change is making. So isn't that in their interest to gallop on and make these alterations?
Yeah. So when I was in the Northeast and we were going through reorganization, if I'm being absolutely frank, I'm allowed to do this now with benefit of distance, being absolutely frank, my eye went off what am I doing for serving my community and was much more on winning an argument about the right structure of local government. So the more quickly we can get through that phase, Matthew, the better for everybody, because we're then into implementation. As long as we're running some kind of contest to see which solution's the most elegant, we're taking our eye off the real prize. And if we've got that going on in multiple parts of the public sector, that's not good for the public. And every one of the people in these leadership roles I've described, I know it's true of you too, and I'm sure it's also the case in every one of your listeners, we want better outcomes for people. So the quicker we can get to solutions and implementation, the better, so we can get back on with the day job.
Yeah. And of course, that conversation, which some of them were leaning into, becomes quite sterile about big versus large versus small, doesn't it? And I've always thought, I'm leading two organizations into an alignment at the moment. It has to be both. It's the benefits of scale, but the support of core delivery at a localized level with empowered leadership to make change in different communities. We've got to strike that balance, haven't we?
Yeah. And I think we're going back into a period, aren't we, of deliverology that we had with Barber not that long ago under the Blair government. I think we're coming back to yes, we've got to have the fiscal discipline, we've got to deliver for the people, but when we're in a period of transition and change, there's a risk that stuff falls away. Yeah. And we've got the benefit of experience of doing this in other times and other places, as had many of your podcast guests. We know that we've got to get through those changes, get to decisions and get to implementation as quickly as we can.
Yeah. And if you think therefore, Mark, about that's a tough ask. We've got the people that local authorities are used to operating within the NHS structure about to go through the same ginormous change, reductions in size of organizations, some organizations completely disappearing. What, in your experience, and you maybe go back to that Northeast experience, what is the thing that you think people therefore must focus on to get right during this period of change, so that the core delivery doesn't get diminished, and as you say, we're not fixated on structure and form all the time.
Yeah, so I think it's Trevor Holden, didn't he, in his interview with you, talked about the importance of leaving your ego and your logo outside the door. I think was
Yeah.
his exact phrase in his time with you, Matthew. So there is something about us as very, senior leaders or aspiring leaders in health and local government, recognizing that we never leave behind our responsibilities to the people we're paid to serve, not just worrying about our institutional self-interests, or indeed, as will be the case on occasions, our own personal interests. And we can get to a point where we're focusing on, I think some of your interviewees talked about missions and purpose during their sessions with you. But at core, it comes down to what outcomes are we trying to deliver for people? And let's be clear across the different organizations about what they are and how we can all put our shoulder to the wheel, or any such cliche, or all put our impetus behind delivering on those particular outcomes, and not lose sight of that even during this period of significant transformations coming our way.
Yeah. And I think, if I'm being critical of my own backyard, which I'm regularly critical of my own backyard in terms of the NHS, I think there can be an element of distrust from the NHS of local government leaders. Sorry, I don't mean that in elected leaders, but chief execs, directors of adult social care, leading work on behalf of. And I was really interested in the way that Alison talked about up in Wigan, that she takes a geographical responsibility. I think she talked very nicely about having integrated care board, NHS strategic staff working with her, having exemplary relationships with all the different providers of healthcare, and driving that change. What's your kind of insight, Mark, about why people like Alison has driven and been able to deliver some of that, where that just seems ridiculously hard elsewhere? I can think, I mean, I used to work in Interest England, as you know, and I've been to quite a few visits where it's just palpable when you're in the room that people have no trust in each other and are just not aligned in terms of what they're doing. So what makes that difference in your experience?
So I loved listening to Alison's session with you, and I think she talked about one of the initiatives they're working, a national pathfinder called Living Well, and Alison highlighted about the importance of letting communities provide leadership.
Okay.
She didn't talk much about the Wigan deal, which is pretty famous in the local government world, about how they've redefined their relationships with the public. She kind of stepped away from that. But at the core, Alison was talking about her council and everything it does being on tap for local people rather than the council being on top. And I worked with a wonderful, inspiring individual called Peter Brooks during my time in the Northeast. And Peter helped us to achieve better community outcomes by helping reorientate our whole organization and our partners to think about how we support and enable people rather than us sitting in a professional role thinking we know best. And I think that does translate into our partnership arrangements as well, Matthew. If you've got people walking in there, pumping their chest saying, I'm from the council, they're not going to get the best relationship from their partner organizations. But if they're in that room saying, we've got this particular community that's got high levels of deprivation, it's got particular health needs that need addressing, the real issues around child poverty, a long list of issues. What can we do for that community? How can we marshal our resources to help that community to address the issues it's facing? We're going to have a different conversation. And I think the best leaders in local government bring that place-based approach. They are the leaders of place. They coordinate and pull together all of those threads of local activity with their partners to try and get the best possible approach across the piece. And Alison's a brilliant example of that. She's absolutely brilliant.
She is. I mean, an observation I had compared to other councils that I know is she's also got the benefit of a pretty stable political arrangement up there that has been the same for quite some time, that seems to have had some consistency in both the council approach and their political drive going forward. And I'm sure that must make a difference.
Yeah, and I think she also, the other thing that's really important is, understanding the pressures that our partners are under. Alison, without making any big deal of it, in her conversation with you, was talking about hospital flows. She was talking about A&E frequent flyers. Didn't quite use that language, but that's what she was meaning. So immediately building bridges with key partners because she understands the problems they face too, and how can we together solve some of those problems. Same point that Rachel made about identifying the three things that really are troubling us all, and how can we work together to solve them, right? It's clever stuff. And you've got some great examples in your podcast of how to do this effectively.
Yeah. So, Mark, as we draw this to some kind of conclusion, or end, I should say, let me ask you one other thing. We've kind of talked about local government devolution, changes happening, NHS England whole apparatus. That's either, and this is maybe not an either or, but it could be cataclysmic, just bizarreness all over the place, or it creates a design that is far more purposeful and intentful than we have at the moment. If you were sitting back and thinking, well, okay, rather than just do what we do now, but do it differently, do you think there's anything else that actually we should be encouraging the government to be perhaps slightly more on the front foot about and be more dynamic about when we think about all that oscillation between health and the councils?
Gosh, I think it's something.
I'm getting you to earn your cross this afternoon, Mark. Come on.
Yeah, no, I've got an old thought going through my mind, Matthew. I kind of feel the need to say. It just reminds me of that old saying. I'm sorry for sending you a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. And one of your commentators talked about the importance of making the complex simple.
Yeah.
Right. And there is something in all of this for people in emerging or current leadership roles about how do we take everything that we're trying to achieve and condense it into a form that I could go and talk to my mum and dad about, and they'd get it, they'd understand it without any fancy explanations or management speak, straightforward. And through all of this change that we're all going to go through in our shared worlds, Matthew, and all of the history we've got together, there is something about us coming together in an appropriate locality and saying, what is it that's going to really matter to us in the coming 2 or 3 years? And how do we unite around those things? And we don't allow anything, all of the external pressures, all of the things that are going to go on nationally and internationally to knock us off course, because they are the key things for us to drive on. And I think having those conversations, recognizing that people do business with people, Matthew, they need to be able to look at each other and talk these things through. If we can work out those lists together with our political leaders locally, it will stand us in good stead. And what do we need from central government, which is where you started this? We need central government to deliver on that rewiring promise that they're making, that allow us at a local level, our health and local government colleagues, to come up with the right local strokes for local folks. What are the right local solutions? And how do we drive them forward so that we really can make a tangible difference to the pressures that are facing our communities and the people that live in them? So we need an enabling government, frankly. And if they want us to do more with less, give us the flexibility to use our resources in the way that's going to have the maximum outcome.
And I guess my final reflection, Mark, is I realise the stupidity in my question that I just posed to you, because it's something I would chastise myself about regularly, because it's very lazy to kind of say, I can't do something until them in central government them do that. The reality is there is a lot of flexibility for people to do things in incredibly different ways already, aren't there? Both in care acts, healthcare, all kinds of things. You can list them. I think going back to the theme of this all these series and what the podcast is about is, frankly, it comes down to leadership and doing it in the right way. And you've just nailed it in terms of setting the priorities, delivering it and going for it. And dare I say, probably taking some risks and working out your alliances to achieve that. That really has to be the answer as well, doesn't it?
It does. And through all of this, Matthew, I think Stephen Moore touched on this towards the end of his time with you. Make sure that we look after ourselves and each other during this period of change. We will have been through a lot together, and we're going to go through a lot together. Let's watch out for each other during these coming months and years.
Mark, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you to you and Empower for helping me put together this kind of quick series with people from local authorities. It's been really great to listen to different views and also to hear your insights and your reflections about, and I just love the passion. You're passionate about this stuff as well, but there's this fabulous public servant, but with a hard edge of delivery and making change. It's everything we need and more from everywhere across the country at the moment, isn't it? So thank you for doing that.
My pleasure, Matthew. All the best to you.